Okay, I have three big stories for you today. First is Dmitriev is in Washington, and they're talking about ceasefire talks and what's going on there. And then we'll talk about NATO, what's not happening with the U.S. presence in NATO, and how the Europeans may be or may not be or may be stepping up, and we'll see how that all plays out. And then we'll talk about, like, the bigger story today is the fallout from Trump's tariffs and how that's affecting, well, everyone, and how the Ukrainians are experiencing it, how the Russians are experiencing it, how the rest of the world's experiencing it. This is really an important topic, and we'll get to that. It is Thursday, April 3rd. 2025. So this is Kirill Dmitriev. He's in Washington to meet with Trump's team on Putin's direct orders. As he claims, he blames the Biden administration for wrecking U.S.-Russia ties, and that's going to play very well with President Trump, that kind of language. And he says that there are forces out there trying to block any thaw. And by that, he's probably alluding to the Europeans. They fear the U.S. and Russia might find common ground. Okay, this is the kind of language calculated to make Trump sympathetic, maybe. Okay, and he's pushing dialogue and investments. Like we ought to be trading, we ought to be involved, and let's get past this, this Ukraine stuff that's not really of any interest to you. Okay, so that's going to be the message to the Trump administration. Meanwhile, there's a headline today: Trump's Easter ceasefire in Ukraine won't happen, the White House admits. Yeah, they're now to the point that they're starting to understand that this is not going to actually happen. Okay, does Putin want a ceasefire? I mean, he just mobilized another 160,000 troops. This is Maria Bartiromo asking General Kellogg.
I mean, he just mobilized another 160,000 troops.
Yeah, Maria, he says that, but I think both sides kind of want to figure a way out of this.
Yeah, maybe not. I don't know the degree to which they want it that badly. I think the Trump administration wants it far more. And while we're talking about this mobilized 160,000 troops, someone corrected me, and I don't know if the correction's right, but I think it is. He conscripted another 160,000 troops. Mobilization is generally what you talk about when you go into like an extra level above that, like mobilizing the country, as opposed to conscripting another 160,000 to the army. It's a technical term, but I used the same term that way yesterday as well. So I'm correcting myself, but I'm in good company with Maria Bartiromo talking about this as well. Okay, U.S. will skip a key Ukraine defense meeting for the first time, as Pete Hegseth won't attend or even join virtually. No senior Pentagon officials are expected to go. This is a clear sign that the U.S. is shifting away from supporting Ukraine, according to Noel reports. And this is carried in Defense News. So what's going on here? Yeah, that's right. The U.S. policy is looking toward Asia and what could happen with China, and having to brace for what could happen there. Europe's going to have to really maintain that with maybe the U.S. as a nuclear umbrella and backstop, but that's the way that it's going. Now, at the same time, there's other statements here. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the Trump administration is committed to remaining in NATO and urged military alliance 32 members to pledge to increase their spending to strengthen its defense capabilities. Here's Rubio talking about that right now.
Invest more in national security. But the events of the last few years, a full-scale ground war in the heart of Europe, is a reminder that hard power is still necessary as a deterrent. And so we do want to leave here with an understanding that we are on a pathway, a realistic pathway, to every single one of the members committing and fulfilling a promise to reach up to 5% of spending. That includes the United States will have to increase its percentage. Because if the threats truly are as dire as I believe they are, and the members of this alliance believe they are, then that threat has to be confronted by a full and real commitment to have the capability to.
Okay, so now what's interesting about this is, yes, he's still talking about this, and it's coming from the Secretary of State. Now, the Secretary of State is usually the one talking about, no, we need to negotiate. We need to, rather than being a hawkish kind of voice, generally speaking. No, he can work with the Secretary of Defense, but the Secretary of State is usually the more diplomatic kind of voice. So it's strong rhetoric And I think this is Rubio rather than Rubio as mouthpiece for the Trump administration. It's crossing there's a confluence here between what Trump wants to carry, which is Europe, you need to step up, and what Rubio would like to carry in and of himself. That's just my speculation, but from everything I know about Rubio, that sounds correct. Okay, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, kind of related to this, said that the Ukrainian delegation might soon might soon be in the U.S. to sign the new deal, that's the mineral deal, but argued that's the exact same deal as earlier agreements despite its changes. But no, it's changed significantly. So the Ukrainians ought to be holding out to get the deal signed correctly. Okay, let's talk about what's going on in Europe. So the Europeans need to step up in a meaningful way. Rubio is arguing for 5% support for their militaries each in order to counter the Russian threat. That's really important here. And he volunteers the coalition of the willing. Ukraine agrees that at least one European leader should talk to Russia. French President Stubb suggested that France or the UK should be the ones to speak with Putin. Something tells us it's going to be Macron. Okay, so maybe it will be Macron. I don't know. Maybe Starmer, maybe Macron. Macron seems to be the one that has the best ability to conduct that negotiation. But okay. Kaja Kallas was in Poland today with European defense ministers. She said, I expect thorough discussions of our support for Ukraine and ways to strengthen our defense, including funding, common procurement, flagship projects. I have zero against Kaja Kallas, right? I'm not saying I haven't said an ill word against her. She's aware of how the Russians negotiate. But the commentary here was spectacular by Jay in Kyiv. And again, this is not a level at Kaja necessarily, but just the EU is really good at planning meetings to discuss further meetings, to plan summits at which meetings will be scheduled, to decide dates for further meetings, but not so good at defending the continent as Russians continue to destroy Western civilization. I mean, Jay, if you were in my class, you'd have an A. I mean, that's brilliant rhetoric right here. This is exactly what has been the problem as far as the U.S. slow walked aid, and then Trump came in and now blown the thing up, right? What the Europeans did was slow walk things by talking about it and talking about it and talking about it to death. And now that Trump has kind of blown things up, going, we got to get serious. But how serious are they? That's really the question. Okay, let's look at the third big story, and this is the big story. Okay, yesterday I put out this video. Explainer for Liberation Day. Maybe people didn't like my thumbnail. Maybe that's what was causing a lack of people to watch, but you need to watch this. Watch this video next. This should be the very next thing that you do. I'll link it at the back end and below. Okay, so it's talking about Trump's tariffs, and he called this Liberation Day, and you got to see what's going on with this. It's really amazing. Ursula von der Leyen called Trump's universal tariffs a major blow to the world economy. I'm of like mind. I think that I think more tariffs are worse than fewer tariffs. Let's just say that's how I process this, right? Now, if Trump is trying to create reciprocal tariffs so that they take their tariffs off and we take our tariffs off, okay, but I don't know that that's what's motivating it. She goes on to state that the global economy will massively suffer. Uncertainty will spiral and trigger the rise of further protectionism. The consequences will be dire for millions of people around the globe. Okay, that's Ursula's view of this. Here's how it's carried in Russia's newspapers. Listen to this.
Warrior is the headline in Izvestia today after Donald Trump imposed sweeping tariffs on a string of countries. Not on Russia, though. The paper predicts a global trade war that will reduce global GDP and raise inflation. But this will only affect Russia indirectly, since Russia does little trade with America. Okay,
so they started off by calling him a trade warrior. They're saying Russia does little trade with America to begin with. Okay.
Mind you, Moskovsky Komsomolets reminds us of President Trump's threat to implement secondary tariffs of between 25 and 50% on all oil exports from Russia if he decides Moscow is to blame for dragging out talks on a comprehensive ceasefire in Ukraine. And a group of US senators has drawn up a bill that would significantly toughen sanctions on Russia if it won't agree to a lasting peace with Kiev. Among other things, a 500% tariff on imports into America from countries that buy Russian oil, gas, uranium and other resources. In effect, this would mean a complete break in economic trade relations with countries like China and India, and a colossal shock to the global economy.
Now, I talked about this yesterday in my 3 big stories. This secondary sanctions of 500% means we're not trading with you if you keep doing that. And that is some significant leverage. I don't know that Trump will go for that. This was created by Lindsey Graham and Democrat Senator Blumenthal. And yeah, we'll see how that all plays out. But this is what's carried in the Russian papers. Now, this is how this is being explained on CNN. I think it's a pretty fair thing. You can have this or you can have that. So which is it that they really want?
Now, if Peter Navarro is right, and this is all about bringing billions, trillions into the economy, then that is contradictory to the idea that it is designed to improve American production and bring production back. Because, think about it logically, if you bring American production back, then you won't be getting the import tariff, therefore you won't be getting the revenue. You can't have both. They are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. Johnny Pierce talked about that yesterday, and I showed you in a video where it had Johnny Pierce's face and Ronald Reagan's face on it, and yeah, they were in agreement. It's weird. Okay. Kyiv Post carried this headline: Trump excludes Russia from new tariffs as White House says sanctions already preclude any meaningful trade. Okay, let's just hold on to that thought for a second. Michael McKay put this out. Trump puts tariffs on Ukraine and U.S. allies. Trump imposed no tariffs on Russia. Trump is a Russian asset. Okay, so why did he impose no tariffs on Russia? That's really the question. This is commentary, and hold on a second. We'll come to this. Okay. So we'll answer that in just a moment. How is it affecting Ukraine first? Difficult but not critical. The Minister of Economy explained how Trump's new tariffs will impact Ukraine. The general tariff of 10% applies to Ukrainian exports to the U.S. In 2024, Ukraine exported goods worth $874 million to the U.S. while importing $3.4 billion in return. So that 10% is a floor for everyone. That's just how it is for everybody around the world. But again, there's a huge trade deficit here of $874 million to $3.4 billion. I don't know why the trade deficit matters. One, I don't know. It doesn't matter at all to Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine's in an odd state, but around the world, I think we talk about this trade deficit as though it's a boogeyman. I just don't see why it's that important, but that's from my economic perspective. Okay. Let's try to understand something here. Understand that and accept it, says the U.S. Treasury official about the tariff countries, and stay calm. Now, I was watching this in real time as this was being said. Let's listen to this.
You know, you look at this list of all these countries, and there's some policy decisions here. China is at 34%, added to the 20% already, so that's 54% on Chinese goods.
Yep.
Are they going to come back with something big?
Well, we'll see what they do. Is my advice to every country right now is do not retaliate. Sit back. Take it in. Let's see how it goes, because if you retaliate, there will be escalation. If you don't retaliate, this is the high watermark.
So also not in the list, Russia, Belarus, but Ukraine is on the list. Mexico, Canada, not on the list, other than the fentanyl tariffs already there. There's a decision making here.
Well, Russia and Belarus, we don't trade.
You know, you look at this
list.
list.
Russia and Belarus we don't trade with anyway, and it would go on a little bit more and say because they're already so sanctioned, whatever. Okay, so that's the way that they're explaining that. Here, how's Medvedev explaining this? As it is, Russia barely does any trade with the U.S. and EU. Nearly all of it is under sanctions. Yet our economy is growing at 3% now. We'll take the advice of Lao Tzu and sit by the river, waiting for the body of the enemy to float by the decaying corpse of the EU economy. Okay, so he's confirming they don't do much. Now, here's how Anton Gerashenko is explaining this. President Trump announced reciprocal tariffs. Russia was not included in that list. Officially, the U.S. stated that the new U.S. tariffs do not apply to Belarus, Cuba, DPRK, and Russia. The White House said that these countries are already subject to extremely high duties and that the sanctions prevent significant trade with them. However, this may be part of Trump's negotiation strategy. Either you agree to some kind of peace format, or the 500% tariffs promised by Lindsey Graham will be imposed on all goods from countries that buy Russian oil, like India and China. And maybe that's it. I don't know. I'm just trying to give you some perspectives. By the way, China, like the tariffs would affect China in such a way, not the 500%. That's crazy. I mean, that's a whole different thing. Before the 500%, if we don't even do that, something that you buy for $10 using round numbers will now cost the consumer $15 because of a 50% tariff. Now that $5 of that 15 goes to the U.S. government, but the consumer is paying for it, so it's more expensive. Now, take the example of the 500% tariffs, then that $10 item now costs $50 round numbers. Yeah, $60 probably, because 500%. So $60. And yeah, so that's kind of where we are. So it'll cut down from trade from China. This commentary was really interesting. It's among the most remarkable features, and I'm relating this commentary because I know somebody's going to ask me in a comment. It's among the most remarkable features. No law was passed except prior laws that referred to emergencies. Congress was not consulted. House leaders didn't want to be. The president asserts sole power to raise taxes within days, could lower them tomorrow or double them by Friday. Okay, and that's right. So Congress, according to the Constitution, has the power to lay and collect taxes and tariffs and those kind of duties, right? So, but Congress has delegated some of this power in 1962, I think it was, to the president to be able to add tariffs as necessary for critical kinds of events or critical emergencies as he sees them. And that's what Trump is using. So both Trump and Congress has this power unless Congress revokes that power. But revoking that power, I think, would require Congress to create a bill and have the president sign it. And I'm not sure that Trump wants to revoke the power on himself. Okay, Michael McFaul says this. Well, James Surowiecki looked at the tariffs today. Tariffs today effectively require working and middle-class people to pay taxes to subsidize a small number of manufacturing jobs. So it will benefit manufacturing in the U.S., while also hurting the large number of people who work for American businesses that rely on imported inputs. Tariffs are just bad for the economy. I would agree. Surowiecki's an author. I almost used required one of his texts in one of my classes. So he's a pretty sharp guy. Okay, Nike just lost nearly $10 billion in market cap in under an hour because Trump slapped 46% tariff on Vietnam, where Nike has over 450,000 workers and 130 factories. The stock cratered by 7%, and investors hit the panic button. Now, this was between trading. So from the close of business last night at 4 o'clock, when this announcement came out yesterday after the stock market closed, until this morning, that's what happened, 7%. And when I looked at it this morning, they're down 8.7%. For the day. So yeah, there's going to be hurt and dislocation in the economy. So we called this Liberation Day. Liberation Day in June of 1930, Smoot was confident that stocks will rise. So there was a Smoot-Hawley tariff. Hoover signs the tariff bill. As Bora in the Senate seeks cuts by flexible clause. Okay, this was 1930. 1930s were not really a boom time in the United States. The U.S. weighted average tariff with Trump's new orders in effect will be higher than under Smoot-Hawley, according to this author. And I'm just like, wow, that's pretty amazing. Michael McFaul is highlighting Mike Pence. Michael McFaul worked for the Obama administration as the ambassador to Russia, so he's on the left side of the spectrum. Mike Pence is obviously on the right. Really admire Mike Pence for speaking up. Mike Pence posted this: the Trump tariff tax is the largest peacetime tax hike in U.S. history. These tariffs are nearly 100 times the size of those imposed during the Trump-Pence administration. Or I'm sorry, 10 times the size of those imposed during the Trump-Pence administration, and will cost American families over $3,500 per year. Check out Spoiling America's Golden Age at American Freedom if you want to see more about that. Yeah, there's something about that. Okay, Rand Paul talking about the Trump tariffs. When McKinley put tariffs on in 1890, this is about the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, they lost 50% of their seats politically. They lost them. When Smoot-Hawley put their tariffs in the early 1930s, we lost the House and the Senate for 60 years. So not only bad economically, they're bad politically. Yep, there's that. Okay, Trump administration, just for fun, has put 10% tariff on the Heard and McDonald Islands. This is the list of all those places. Yeah, Heard and McDonald Islands, 10% minimum. If you're not familiar with the Heard and McDonald Islands, that's this little island chain down here. Australia is up here, Africa, and then Australia is below that. So you can, I'm zooming out so you can see that. I'm zooming in so you can see just how small it is and where it is relevant. Okay. There's no population there. There's penguins, but I mean, other than like sealers and whalers that would go down there to capture game, like in the 18 somethings, that there's no population there. Trade war with penguins. Trump places 10% tariff on uninhabited Antarctic islands. So that's what's going on there. Andrew Perpetua. Earlier, I gave Jay and Keeve an A+. I want to give one to Andrew Perpetua as well. If I had a store, I'd put an actual price, the tariff price, and your price on literally everything in my store to highlight the true cost of tariffs to my customers. Absolutely, because it's going to cost them. Last thing I'll leave you with is this, my friends. This is some kind of metaphor. I'm not exactly sure for what or who, but this guy is shooting his cart out at the grocery store. The lady decides she's going to put it right behind him. He's like, what? This cart behind me? Puts it out. So as soon as he puts it out, she puts another one behind him. And yeah, this is kind of where we are. It's a metaphor alert for something. I'm not exactly sure what, but the kind of stuff that we do in international relations and internet geopolitics it kind of looks like this. All right. Thank you, my friends, for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, and the subscribes and the coffees. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.